La stjernene får dysse deg i søvn. Hold av en plass til meg i din drøm. Og vær da ikke redd mens du sover, for natten skader ingen, og jeg lover. Jeg vil våke ved din side og vokte deg i natt. Og senere, når dine øyne åpnes, og dagen skjenker av sitt lys til deg, vær da ikke redd mens du våker, for dagen er din venn, og jeg lover, når den er over, vil jeg våke ved din side og vokte deg igjen. And so we will continue our reading of The Red Lion by Maria Schepis. And we will start now with chapter 2, which will come in a few parts because it is a long one. Chapter 2 is entitled Eduard, Anselmus, Rochard. It took me fully half a year to reach Nuremberg. First, I had to make the necessary money. To do this, I tried manual labor, chopping wood, carrying water, digging and hoeing, but the pay was miserable. In the evenings, I would drop like a log onto my cot. No, I decided, such work was for animals, not for men, especially a man like me, who was striving towards something entirely different. So I joined up with a carnival magician. He was an Italian, a jabbering little man who was as swift and pliant as a lizard. His name was Vincenzo Giacomini. He knew only one science, but he knew that one thoroughly, the science of profiting from ignorance and gullibility. He could tell fortunes from palms, make diverse miracle medicines for aging men and barren women, compose love letters and poems for various occasions, and, if he had to, extract teeth and draw blood. He was also a first-class expert at opening latches and locks and conjuring small objects out of strangers' pockets, or back in again if it seemed necessary. His expertise was such that the Italian authorities had requested him to keep his operations outside their borders. His pride in himself and his so-called art knew no bounds. "This is a very serious business, Hans," he would say with a comic mixture of cynicism and self-importance. "The very fact that you met me proves you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth," he would continue. "Watch and learn. You can make gold with this science. If someone stretches out his palm, pretend to be studying it deeply, but really watch the man in front of you. It won't be difficult to determine what type he belongs to. Learn the 12 schemes, one of them will fit him." The important thing, the magician's lecture would conclude, is to talk constantly. Mix, weave, and cast spells with your words. Your victim will find seeds in them that he will swallow gratefully, and afterwards he will crow about what great things have happened to him. Now, the basic material of all miracle medicines is water, and don't you forget it. The magic power is on the label. That's an exact analogy of man himself. Water on the inside, and name and title on the outside. And the more disagreeable the medicine is, the more they'll believe in it. So, salt it, pepper it, and put vinegar in it so that sheer horror shakes the person who tastes it. Make it burn through his guts like hellfire. I've coaxed the Bengal light from many an extinct volcano that way. I have a whole legion of godchildren. My patients all believe they begat those sons in their happy agony. Luckily, women aren't inclined to talk much about the source of the fruit of their wombs. That's how the legend of the Immaculate Conception has lasted so long. But Monsieur Vincenzo had one incurable problem. He did not want to pay his help. Though he acknowledged the justice of income, he passionately denied that of outlay. "Now, don't be an ingrate, Hans," he would say, looking deeply offended that I had asked him for my pay. "I don't pay you with money. Your pay is the secrets into which I have initiated you. After all, I'm getting old, and when I retire, you can have this territory. Just be patient." It was just because he had initiated me into the secrets of his arts that I refused to tolerate his deception. Here I was, his beast of burden, miracle medicine peddler, barker, collector, laundress, cook, and famulus all rolled into one, and he would not pay me a cent. But when I left the old impostor, I had exactly the amount of money we had originally agreed upon in my pocket. Presumably, he lamented over the loss of such a skillful student. I took it from under his pillow while he slept. Ever since I had first heard of Nuremberg, it had lived in my imagination as a fable with limitless possibilities. Whatever I had expected of that city, then boiling up to the dramatic culmination of its fate, I was not disappointed. Its beauty captivated me, an enchanted, sparkling jewel box embedded in the hilly emerald forests. The Gothic spires of its churches and chapels were awe-inspiring, melodious psalms. Here, the many types of people I had met during my wanderings were present in crowds, jamming the sloping cobblestone streets among warm gingerbread houses. I would hear scraps of conversation in Czech, French, and Italian, as well as the various German dialects. I drifted through the city with wide eyes and an open soul, taking in the narrow funnels of the streets where the guilds were, the wide bays of church and market squares, and the whole din of humanity upon them. There were boisterous groups of students, stout market women, wandering journeymen in velvet jackets, flat-chested virgins, sleepy-looking nuns, jolly monks with ruddy faces and pot-bellies, ascetic priests, beggars with horrible-looking sores, peasants who smelled of manure and led red-spotted cows, men on horseback loudly demanding the right of way, and apprentices shouting obscenities as they hustled baggage. For a few weeks I roamed through the city, happily aloof from the clattering of humanity. Then, when I ran out of money, I got a job at a small inn near Sebaldus Church. I chopped wood and carried water and luggage to the rooms, careful to conceal the fact that I could read. If I had let it become known, I would have been set to crouch all day in the dark office by the kitchen, well away from the mainstream of events that I so vitally needed to observe. I had to be in a position to watch, in case fate threw before me the one man out of all those people, or even the one possibility that would lead me to my goal, the philosopher's stone. This water and luggage carrying provided me with some very interesting insights. I discovered, for instance, that titled ladies and respectable burghers' wives, once they had gotten rid of their servants or chaperons, behaved very much like smitten kitchen maids. I was a muscular, handsome lad in those days, and I liked to keep myself clean. This, combined with the quiet, closed rooms and the transitory nature of the situation, was an irresistible attraction for these women. I marveled at how much alike they all were in their barely disguised lust. The same faces, the same small, foolish sounds, movements, and coquetry. Whenever I happened to get a fleeting appetite, I tasted this particular fruit of the tree of knowledge, but it didn't mean much to me. I was too burdened with a feverish, transcendent restlessness to see life through the eyes of a Boccaccio. One idea, grown to an obsession, filled my every thought. The stench of death ruins life. Life is beautiful, yes, but it is also pointless if man is to live only a few years. If he is to be a burnt-out wreck after only a few pleasures. Yet the muscles become flabby, the teeth fall out, and life flickers out like a candle. I could not understand how people could have the heart to jostle about, show off their importance, marry, pursue a vocation, or engage in any other activity when at any moment their lives might come to an end. At best, they could only live a few more decades. Why didn't they run away when they went to funerals and saw their own death sentences in the faces of the dead? Why didn't they run from the cemetery, away from their homes and family and profession, and look for the elixir of eternal life, infinite pleasure and youth? This elixir does exist, though it is more difficult to acquire than the greatest treasures on the earth. Yet, what good are earth's treasures if we must die? I would think about these things as I watched the surging crowds on the streets, chattering, laughing, and enjoying the sunshine. The thought would strike me with shock as I watched the face of the woman in my arms contort with pleasure. Didn't they know it? Didn't they think about it? Did they believe death would pass them by? Couldn't they see their own death masks looking back at them from the mirror when they smiled into it? Why did they bother with anything else? Didn't they realize that every instant was precious, that the next might be too late? One cool October day, a modest guest arrived at the inn. I didn't notice him immediately, for his figure did not catch the eye. In his dark clothing, he blended in with the crowd and became lost. He had carried his own luggage too, a blue iron-handled wooden chest. He rented one of the cheap rooms that opened into the yard. When I overheard him talking with the innkeeper, I noticed casually that while he spoke German well, he spoke with an accent. His pronunciation was like that of the Frenchmen I had had dealings with, and his name also sounded French. Eduard Anselmus Rochard. The first night he was there, I brought warm water to his room. He was sitting at a table drawing strange figures, a compass beside him, an open book by his elbow, and Chinese ink and paper before him. He was drawing intelligible signs in an ink circle that had been divided into segments by several diameters. This strange occupation aroused my interest. Quickly, I stole a glance around. There were books on the night table. I hurriedly read the title of the book on top, De Alchimia. My throat felt parched, and my heart beat wildly. In excitement, I forgot myself completely and stood rooted to the spot. When I looked up, Rochard was watching me with a cool, inquisitive gaze. "Are you waiting for something?" he asked quietly. Painful embarrassment washed over me. All my hard-won cunning and poise dissolved in the cold light of those bluish-green, penetrating eyes. "No," I stammered. "Forgive me, my lord." I left quickly. What was the matter with me? I asked myself when I was alone in my cubbyhole. Why had the sight of that book upset me so much? I had seen other guests with alchemy books. The spirit of the thing permeated that age. People were still ignorant and greedy enough for it to be a fad, and they were shallow enough to want only the yellow scum of the deep sea of alchemy, the method of making gold. No, it wasn't the book that had upset me. It was the aura of Eduard Anselmus Rochard himself. His eyes. Yes, those eyes and his face, that flashing revelation of personality that confused me so deeply. When we had looked into each other's eyes, it was as though a magician had conjured up a magnificent castle with a wave of his hand. That quiet, somber figure, so modest and aloof. Suddenly something had burst forth from him. What? Power? Yes. That was it. Power. I had met many kinds of people, idiots and scholars, braggarts and beggars, lords and peasants, eccentrics and rogues, but none of them had had this power. What if? My pulses pounded as I thought of it. What if this were the person for whom I had been waiting? I spent a sleepless night. If I fell into a troubled doze for a few minutes, I would start awake with a stab of fear that he might be gone in the morning. This fear tortured me so much that I finally crawled out of my cubbyhole and ran silently through the sleeping inn to Rochard's door. There I flattened myself and listened to his breathing. In the morning, I could hardly wait to get to his room. He was not there, and his books were gone from the night table, but his padlocked blue chest was under the bed. Later that morning, I had to go to the bar for some reason, and I saw Rochard there with a group of drunken students and idlers, spinning a yarn for them with a great gusto. It must have been an amusing and somewhat disreputable tale, for his listeners frequently burst into lusty guffaws of laughter. I hid under the stairway and watched this many-faceted, incomprehensible stranger. Yesterday, I had seen him as an extraordinary adept, but today he was acting like a drunken bum, like Sebastian. This similarity struck me forcibly. How often had I seen Sebastian sitting with flushed face at a tavern table surrounded by an audience that drank in the magic of his words with shining faces and stupid open mouths. He was always bitter after one of these orgies, as he called them. I could hear his words echoing from the past. "Did you see my performance today?" He would laugh with bitter self-scorn. "I was a big success, wasn't I? I could have had the same success with a bunch of sheep. They wandered, laughed, and were horrified by turns, but then they just went right on grazing. How I envy and hate people like that. They're a dim-witted herd of animals, but at least they are never lonely. They all snuggle up to each other's warm, smelly bodies and have the same foggy thoughts about food, drink, and lovemaking in their dull brains. I'm terribly alone among them, Hans. My soul has already died of loneliness. I'm really dead. The only reason I shout and agitate so much is that I'm afraid of the corpse that is my soul. If I didn't have you, Hans, I would have hanged myself long ago." Then perhaps this thin, pale man with the greenish-blue eyes was also trying to run away from something by diving into his quote-unquote herd and covering himself with laughter. Maybe it was a disguise, as it had been with Sebastian. The way he had looked last night and the way he looked now, there was too great a difference. There was some secret here. Now Rochard interested and attracted me more strongly than before. I watched him and did not let him out of my sight. That night, I brought hot water to his room again. He was sitting at the table reading. For a moment, he looked up, absorbed in thought, and then he turned to his book again. This Rochard was still different from the two previous ones. Now, his face was intent but infinitely gentle, like the quiet surface of the water with the sun reflected on it. I puttered quietly about the room, pausing to wipe up a few drops of water on the floor so I could read the title of his book from underneath. When I was just about to leave, because I couldn't make myself inconspicuous any longer, his quiet voice stopped me. "What do you want from me?" The question was so unexpected that I could only stammer. I don't... You have been spying on me. Today, when I was in the bar, you watched me for over an hour from under the stairway. Now you are spying on my books. Can you read? Yes. I felt naked and paralyzed under this penetrating gaze. Who taught you? Who are you? A tremendous impulse, such as I had never felt before, drove me on. I fell on my knees in front of him and heated, jumbled words rushed from my mouth. "I want to serve you, my lord. I wouldn't ask for pay just to be allowed to learn. That was the reason I left home. I am Hans Burgner, my lord, the only friend I ever had. An old relative reared me. His name was Sebastian Dorner, and he was an alchemist. He died before he had succeeded, but I still want to go ahead," I implored. "You want to make gold, don't you?" There was more sadness than scorn in his voice. "No, I don't care about making gold," I exclaimed vehemently. "Then what do you want?" "The elixir!" My voice trembled, and I choked in my excitement. "Why do you want to live longer than other people?" he asked quietly, studying me intently as he spoke. "Can you accept the fact that you are going to die? Have you never seen a corpse, sir? Have you never seen those you loved, whose words gave you pleasure and comforted you in sorrow, dissolve into rotten flesh? Isn't death really our only enemy, the thing that snaps at our heels and whispers terrible words?" He looked away. "You are a strange fellow," he said tonelessly. "Please get up. I am not accustomed to being mistaken for an altar." I picked myself up shamefacedly, and he stood also, his face stiff. "I really don't see why you have come to me with your request. I am just a poor physician on a study tour. I travel on foot, and I don't need any servants." I stared at him. Suddenly he seemed to be a worn-out old man. What could I want of him? He was so convincing that it seemed everything I had thought of him had been the creation of my own exuberant imagination. I grew more ashamed of my foolish behavior every second, and I could hardly wait to stammer out my apologies and leave the room. "I must be going crazy," I growled to myself in confusion. "I'm seeing every fool who turns up as an adept with a philosopher's stone under his cloak." But for some strange reason, the further I got from Rochard, the more this last image wore off, and I saw the many-sided stranger who could read Albertus Magnus sham in a bar, and was now hiding from me behind a mask. I suddenly realized that this also was a mask. But why was he pretending so much? Had he committed a crime and been forced to flee the consequences? No. Rochard could not have committed a crime. The criminal was scared, and there was no sign of fear in Rochard. Then why did he hide as one of the drunken, debauched rabble, make himself grey and insignificant? Again I heard Sebastian's words. I had asked him where true adepts could be found. He said, "Nowhere, my son. You don't see them. They submerge in the crowd and dissemble." So why did Rochard travel alone and on foot? "I am a poor physician. I don't need any servants," he had said. Then I became certain that Eduard Anselmus Rochard could be nothing but an adept. He was the wizard of 1,000 kings, and I chanced to meet him one night wandering. He told me tales, and he drank my wine. Me and my magic man kind of feeling fine. He had a cloak of gold and eyes of fire, and when he spoke I felt this deep desire to free the world from its fear and pain, and help the people to feel free again. Why don't we listen to the voices in our hearts? 'Cause then I know we'll find we're not that far apart. Everybody's got to be happy, everyone should sing, 'cause we know the joy of life, the peace that love can bring. Thus spoke the wizard in his mountain home. The vision of his wisdom means we'll never be alone. And I will dream of my magic night and the million silver stars that guide me with their light.